don't. They don't have a reserve account that really handles the replacement of their infrastructure. But Tara let me know that she's not only has a reserve account, she's also got a growth fund, and it just blew my mind. But I don't know, Tara, I'll just turn it over to you at this point.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so council loved this when we did the session, and yeah, so we do have an infrastructure renewal fund, so it all is tied back to asset management planning. So that's been a big focus for us, and legislatively, it's been required now in Canada, or at least in Ontario, to plan for that. And so we have a strategy for tax businesses, but also for our non-tax solar rate utility side. And we report on that through budget. And then for in terms of the growth, so we have specific funding called development charges here that are capital development fees essentially that we levy on new development. I don't know if that's the same in the United States, but it's not 100% recoverable of all of our capital growth costs. So we also have a fund that we set aside to kind of top up those development charges with tax revenues and with our rate revenues, again, just so that we're ensuring that we've got full financial sustainability around those plans. But what I do want to, like, if you the original versions that you were showing here, Joe, about the kind of the costing and the which types of development is uh, subsidizing. I think that's like that would be, I think my goal would be like in the next version or something, and to be able to bring something like that, because I know our council is really interested in the subsidization conversation. So we've never taken it to that level at this point.
And there are simpler analyses. This is maybe the most basic one to do. This is a sewerage map of Eugene, and each of these colored areas is its own trunk system. So this is really easy to do. You can ask your public works director to do this, and it's like, think of this as a really simple basic test or a stress test on the system. So each of these different color coded areas is its own infrastructure, basically. And I asked the engineer, and I was playing dumb in the meeting. I was like, "Hey, does everybody, when they flush their toilet, do they all pay the same per gallon rate?" And the engineer was like, "Of course." That's usually the indicator, because what they're doing is they're doing the cost of the whole system and just dividing it equally against the system. Now, at a geospatial level, not all districts are equal. So we can see that this one district up here has 8 lift stations. Each of those lift stations, these are really expensive pieces of equipment. So this is about a million to $1.5 million of cost per object, and it costs $50,000 a year to maintain them. So that neighborhood right there has $20 million worth of infrastructure that no other neighborhood has. So at a basic level, that's a really easy change. That's like, we just change the rate in that neighborhood to account for that cost. That's something y'all can do really simply without having to go through a complicated model. There's other
questions. So I've got a couple questions I want to address, and we only have 3 minutes, unfortunately. So the typical breakout and other things aren't going to quite work. I had offered that folks, if what we really want to take out of these meetings is questions about feasibility, like thinking about it in your jurisdiction. So one was about, if you're in a rural county in Idaho, like how might this work? And another where population growth is a challenge and our governing body sees absorbing other areas as a method to new growth. So those are both in the chat.
Okay, so for the annexation side, I would just gut test it. Are we just getting immediate new taxes, or are we getting a future liability? So actually, this model that I have up here now is a good example. I like to say that annexation sometimes is like fighting obesity by buying bigger clothes. It's like, it feels good for the first couple of years, but then you have to fix their infrastructure, and it becomes a problem. So here's downtown. Here's one neighborhood and here's another neighborhood. So let's pretend that this is a city and we're going to annex this neighborhood right here. It's just housing. This is just housing. But we can see on the right, you've got double the amount of units on the right versus the left, but you've got half the length of pipe. So the feet of pipe per person is 4 times more on the left than the right. So if we just look at this abstractly, they're just housing districts, but you can see you've got 4 times the infrastructure dedicated to the thing on the left than the right. You're also getting a lot more value out of the neighborhood on the right. Now, typically engineering departments, so like we don't care, we charge a fee, we don't care about valuation. It's like, oh, you don't care how the legal department or the finance department gets paid for. That's cool, because it's just not part of their cash flow. But when you show it to them this way, they understand. But the other thing, check this out, replacing the infrastructure on the left is double the infrastructure on the right. That's going to be the future obligation of that annexation. Now, as far as small places, we did a project in Brevard, North Carolina, which is 6,000 people. Find Brevard real quick.
Yeah, kind of to the point though about like, you know, a lot of this is, you know, more like urban and like more density focused. But yeah, if you are trying to, I think as Liz pointed out, you know, drawing people to, you know, surrounding suburban areas that maybe people want these quality of life, or, you know, other communal values. Like, I guess, would it be placing costs and benefits on those and the cost to maintain them, like just being like having eyes wide open about that?
I mean, even a small place like this is Brevard, North Carolina. This is a town of 8,000 people. It really literally hasn't changed since his postcard was taken. It's literally Mayberry. The mayor's name is Mayor Jimmy. He's been mayor for 30 years. He's super awesome. And, you know, we did their cash flow model. Now you can see their little downtown, which has the tallest buildings, 3 stories in town. You can see it shooting off the map. And when Mayor Jimmy saw this, he's like, hey, we're paying for a stormwater system. Seems like we should be doing a similar analytic. And we're like, yeah, we can do that. So we turned their tax model into a monochrome, and then we modeled their stormwater runoff, which is what you have to pay for, is where the water goes. So this is the stormwater model showing the displacement of water. And you see a lot of displacement for the water in downtown. It's impervious surface. So there's going to be a lot of pipes there. But when you drop this on the tax model, at least the tax model penetrates it. So they're mountain people, so we made a mountain profile of the taxes. This is a side view of the taxes. Here's the runoff. Here's the difference. So there are parts of downtown where you have these surface parking lots not paying anything in taxes, and they have a tremendous amount of stormwater. That's a problem. Find a way to do something different. Maybe a structured parking deck. It's where you're going to get more taxes out of the density or whatever. But that's different from over here on the strip, where you have big boxes that are massively impervious, producing a lot of runoff, and they have huge parking lots. So you're going to be paying for a lot of pipes out there, and you're not getting any revenue out of the big box stuff. And it's real simple. It's just they're cheap boxes. When you tax on value, there's a perverse incentive to build junk. So I don't fault Walmart for that. They just figured out the cash flow system. So this is how you can do it in a small. Everybody, as long as you've got a cash flow, you could visualize it. And you should visualize it, particularly for places that are less sophisticated. I wish we could all be Canadians. Seriously, we need to learn these models in the States.
Yeah, they're world leaders on asset management along with Australia. Chris has been doing a lot of work on that too. A question also from Blake Hart. The base data used for the types of charts, is it tax payments by parcel?
What we do is we use the shape files of your parcels. So that's all geographic data of who owns what land. And then what we do is we take the valuation, and we're always going about how do you pay taxes. So we're going to normalize it to that because there's equalization rates, there's all sorts of stuff. That's all we care about is how do you show the money. So in Canada, everybody's got variable rates and stuff. So you have to do a lot more math to kind of equalize it. But once you get the number of here's where you're paying your tax bill, you just divide that into the acreage to get your tax value per acre. And think of it from a spreadsheet standpoint, you've got your column of value, you've got your column of acreage, you divide one and the other, you create a new column called value per acre. And that's what we're creating a model out of. We're just using that one column to create that map. When you know, the fees are going to be different. Everything's always thinking geospatially. And then the more pipe you have going further out, the more of that cost you should control or contain. Because it's, why should somebody get 10 miles of pipe and pay the same rate of somebody who's just 50 feet from the system? You're going to find weird stuff. You're going to find plenty of weird stuff in the models when you talk to the assessors. But the good thing is, y'all are specially equipped to ask the questions and watch. I show this one slide all the time. We'll go into the models and turn the buildings off. And if you've ever seen one of my presentations, you've seen this image. We always do this. We just turn the buildings off and just look at the dirt value per acre. This is just dirt, this image. You see here how everybody's blue in this one neighborhood? Okay, that seems reasonable. Everybody in that neighborhood has the same per acre dirt value. But we do these models because we're looking for this stuff over here. Notice all these anomalies. That's human error. It's bad math. It could be policy. We don't know. So we're looking for that kind of stuff. But this is another one right here. See how this is all blue? And then this one right here across the street is orange. So that means the value goes from $15,000 to $35,000 just by crossing the street. It's the same zoning category. So when I was presenting this in Cheyenne, the tax assessor raised her hand and she just yelled out at me. She goes, no, you don't understand. This is a bigger parcel. When you have a bigger parcel, there's less value to it. Like, let I wash over you for a second. I'm like, really? You only have so much city. I get to buy a bigger parcel, and you give me a discount? She goes, yeah, that's our standard. And I said, I have 3 miles of street. This person's got 200 feet. She goes, we don't count infrastructure as valuation. So this is where the assessment methodologies actually works against you when you're the service provider, because you have to pay for the street, the pipe, the cops that show up when there's a car accident. It's like, and they don't count any of that in valuation because they're only looking at transactions and they have these standards baked in. So I said to her, I said, I can get more of your stuff and you give me a discount. She's like, that's our standard. So I presented this at the International Association of Tax Assessing Officers, your peers of the assessors. Their magazine is called Fair and Equitable. That's seriously their magazine. And I asked them, I said, how is this fair and how is it equitable? Now, to their credit, they said it's not. And I said, well, where did the standard come from? They're like, we don't know. So when you get into the numbers and you see stuff like this, just realize that you can talk to your peers in the assessment world. And if they're intellectually honest, and you just say to them, how is this fair? How is this equitable? They'll actually engage you. They actually told me at the meeting, at the conference, they're like, it's not fair. It's not equitable. We probably need to change it. So it's like, okay, well, please do. But we all have that DNA baked into our system of math.
You raise a good point that oftentimes when you dig deeper and ask why, like, there's either not a good cohesive answer or people just have to admit that, like, oh, well, I guess it's actually not that great.
Well, I ended up talking to the head of assessment methodology for the national organization, this guy, Larry Clark. And Larry's like, yeah, we need to change it. It'll just take a while, And so it's like, you can find some great people out there, but when you look at these 3-dimensional models of the dirt, it's like some of it makes sense in the downtown. But why is it that, like, let's kind of zoom in a little bit. Why is it that like 2 parcels are so much more above everybody else? Or you start to see these anomalies out here. We know that the assessors don't do models like this. So we use this as a visual aid to like kind of talk on the same piece of paper together. And oftentimes we have to, be nice about it, realizing that, they just never thought to put it on a map. But does this even look even remotely fair right there? That the dirt in this one neighborhood is so much more than everything else? It's crazy. So, again, this is undermining your cash flow at a finance officer standpoint, because there's incentives baked into this where you can see it right here. Look at this one neighborhood and how much their incentive is a low dirt value compared to this neighborhood's getting crushed from a valuation standpoint. Or you could look at it at a standpoint, this one's really, really productive, depending on how you were feeling that day, I guess.
And so what are like the upfront necessary data capacity, you know, because like or like, you know, for folks who might not, like with their internal GIS person, like people do it, and if they don't have one, like how could, you know, maybe many of our member governments implement this kind of analysis?
A lot of cities, actually, back to Guelph for a second. You know, we actually worked with their staff, this guy, Jason, who was an intern back in 2013. And we just coached him on the model making. And it was, you know, kind of teach a man to fish and he fishes for life kind of thing. And he's gone on to have a career inside the city government. Now he's a planner, a senior planner. And when we went back in 2019, he redid the models. So I just showed up and showed Jason's work. Oftentimes the staff has incredibly talented people. They have very capable GIS people. They just don't know what questions to ask. So this is where I would play a little dumb and just ask questions to the GIS people. Like, could you put all the pipes on a map? Could you show me what those look like? Can you show me where all the lift stations are? If you know what costs money, just ask them to map it. They'll do it for you. So we're doing, you know, admittedly, we're doing some pretty complex stuff. We're asking different questions, but there, a lot of the stuff that you see in any of our videos, just ask your staff. And we really do this work because we want to see a systems change in all cities. So we're more advocates than anything else. And we're more than happy to share these lessons.
Awesome. We've gone a little long, and apologize for, you know, folks, if I've kept you longer than you wanted, but do you have a couple minutes if folks are hanging around and have questions? Or
Sure, yeah.
Just looking at the chat log.
Does anybody want to see anything about equity?
I'll let others chime in.
This is a presentation we did on redlining. And I don't know if you all know redlining. Definitely didn't happen in Canada. In 1934, we passed the Federal Home Loan Program, where we basically created a different mortgage system on houses. The mortgage industry went from 7-year mortgages to 30-year mortgages. That was backed by our federal government to try to stimulate home ownership during the Depression. As part of that, the federal government issued this edict to make maps. On the maps, they're known as commonly as redline maps, because each city had to make a map of what was considered good investment, desirable investment, declining neighborhoods, or hazardous neighborhoods. The redline maps, a common parlance or association, is that it was essentially racist against African Americans, which it was. So as a planner, you were given this rule to follow that you had to map where all the Black people were. Once you did, that was considered a hazardous neighborhood. If you were and it wasn't just African Americans, it was Jews. Where I grew up, it was Italians. If you were in Manchester, New Hampshire, it was French people. So it was basically dividing what was the good neighborhoods and the bad neighborhoods. So we're doing a model in Kansas City. Oh, by the way, the redlining maps were law until 1968, when those were considered discriminatory. So you know, a lot of people are like, well, Joe, we stopped doing that. That was 1968. And I was like, all right, that's 52 years ago. Let's take a look at this. Here's Kansas City. Here's the Kansas City model. This is Kansas City, Kansas, or Kansas over here, Kansas City, Missouri over here. And I can tell you as a planner, I look for, when I do these models, we see them like a doctor looking at a CAT scan. I can tell what's going on just by looking at the data. But you can see this ledge right here where it goes from orange to green real fast. That's redlining. So we dropped the redline map on the city, and we're like, all right, so here's the bad neighborhoods. And in Kansas City, actually, it was African Americans and Italians and some Jews that they went after. So this was the Italian neighborhood, the Black neighborhood, the Jewish neighborhood was down here. But basically, east of Troost is this red line right here. These were the neighborhoods that took the hit on the east side. On the west side, you see green and blue neighborhoods over here. So we just would say, okay, that's what happened. And we laid this on the rate, sorry, then here it is laid on the tapestry of our 3D model. And so even today, you can see this haircut that each district takes in valuation. The red line is the worst. 60 years later, who would have thought? On the Kansas side, it's even worse. This is what you're dealing with. And so the Kansas side, and we see this with a lot of clients, that cities that are less well off are actually more serious about finding out how they got there. So they asked us to drill into the neighborhood. And what we looked for was vacant land. So if you're in a red line neighborhood and you're African American, which this neighborhood was here, once it's redlined, you can't sell your house because no one can get a mortgage in that neighborhood because it's been deemed hazardous. And this went on for 30 years. So for 3 generations, you couldn't sell that house. So when we find in those neighborhoods is they frequently get passed to the kids move out of town and go to Chicago or whatever, and they just rent it out. And because they can't sell it, and the house either falls into disrepair or decay, it falls down. So the result at the end of the line is vacant land. So we're looking for vacancy. So these are all the vacant parcels in Kansas City, Kansas. Taking this one neighborhood up here, look at all the vacant land. Now, if you're in that neighborhood and your neighborhood just got bombed out like that, what's going to be your attitude toward government? Well, these are all the tax delinquencies. So I'm like, really, that's really working out for you. So in this one neighborhood, they've got 732 vacant lots. The average taxable value is $400, which is ridiculously low. When you glue a house onto it, you're looking at $17,000 of taxable value. So, which isn't great, but 17,000 is 40 times more than 400. So just to show them what the cost and consequences of this are, because you still have to drive a garbage truck by it, you still have to pay for the street, the pipe, the sidewalk. These are costs that you're picking up, and the value is only $400. So we went back in time, took the value of the houses from 1930 and glued them back onto the vacant parcels and said, let's just hit the delete button on racist policy and figure out how much it cost you in lost taxes. So of the 732 vacant lots, we did a net present value of what they would be and ran the taxes. And I told the community, I said, look, your great grandparents followed racist policies. They basically wrote a check for $30 million from this one neighborhood and just flushed it down the toilet. You lost $30 million in this neighborhood in taxes. That's the cost of redlining in this one neighborhood. So you need to change that because you're leaking money because of all these vacant lots. And the way to stop spending and kind of stabilize it a little bit was it just took 18 houses in this neighborhood. But you know what's going to happen if you try to get a house built. The house is going to cost you $180,000. What bank is going to finance a house that's worth 180 in a taxable value of 17,000? You can't convince the banks to back that mortgage, would you? They wouldn't do it because the market has biases. So what we recommended to the community is take out a bond for 18 houses, do a tax increment district for 18 houses, financially find a way locally to make it happen and find 18 people that are either, they work in city government, they work for the county, whatever. People that are low risk, but you have to stop the bleeding because you're losing money. And this is where a creative financial officer could really help the well-intended people that want to make housing happen. They just don't know how to finance it. But they need, they're losing money already. So is that too nerdy?
Oh, I mean, not for me. I did a lot of housing policy in graduate school, so I'm very here for this. So maybe I didn't quite pick it up. So you said 17,000 in taxable value. Could you just break down like what that 17,000 means? That wasn't quite clear.
The average lot value.
Okay.
The appraised value of all the lots is this. The average lot price with an occupied house on it is the taxable value. Now the market value is going to be a little bit more than that because market value is always adjusted down to a taxable value. Still, it's not much more than that. It'd be maybe double, but it's not. The neighborhood's pretty bombed out from an economic level. But the thing is, like, what we're trying to do with this narrative here is get people to realize the situation that you're in didn't happen overnight. And the hard part is when you work in when you're, your government is all about putting out fires and dealing with today. It's harder to see the broader perspective of how did we get to this point. And it's, you're talking 80 years of damage to a neighborhood. And now we're looking at the result of it. Well, let's go back to that 80 years where the policies started, where the economic decay started. In a lot of these neighborhoods, it's like once they got to that point in the 1960s, we doubled down on the damage by following through with urban renewal policies because they were deemed blighted. It was like, well, gee, how did they get there? Now, it's putting aside the racial discussion about whether or not that was, that wasn't fair to the community in this neighborhood. So that's reparations right there. If you want to know what you extracted out of those families, we can run the number on that.
Yeah, and then you throw in contract sale housing and other things. So a really good question came in actually from Blake Hart. Are there examples of cities who have done this type of tax increment financing in marginalized neighborhoods?
Yes. There's an association I'd recommend. It's called the Incremental Development Alliance. And they're kind of like sort of a Robin Hood group of real estate developers where they drop into your community and find folks that are willing to do the small infill development and tool them up on how to be a real estate developer. Where do you find money? How do you do construction? How do you get a building plan set together? There's Oakland, California, actually sets up their capital improvement structure to be equitous to neighborhoods that haven't received capital improvement for generations. So they're doing similar maps to these, but then tying it back to the equity of physical infrastructure. Because that infrastructure may stimulate redevelopment in those neighborhoods. So if they were neglected, because oftentimes what ends up happening, everybody's like, well, it's a poor neighborhood, it'll never pay off the pipe. And it's just like, well, how do you know that? So they're changing that. They have a very elaborate program for their equity investment in their communities. But it's really different across, it's more sophisticated places have more sophisticated tools. I'm trying to just rolling through my brain. South Bend, Indiana is kind of like in a war with their county to try to keep the investment in the city and keep the county from shifting their population outward. But they're trying to deal with a lot of this equity and development as well.
Can I jump in really quick? I feel like I have to give a little bit of a plug. The city of Chicago, which gets a lot of, and I'm not going to say it's not well-deserved, criticism for its use of TIF funds, has actually done a lot over the years in distressed neighborhoods for affordable housing and this kind of like neighborhood development kind of stuff. And one thing, I used to work there, so full disclosure. But the one thing that they did that was really cool too was they had like a TIF district set aside, and they were, residential neighborhoods, probably not unlike what you just highlighted in Kansas City, and not only for new development or infill development, but also for would like have these funds where existing people could also fix up their homes. So that, which was also just a neat feature, I thought. Like, okay, if you want to, we want to get new people, like you said, moving into these areas, but for folks who have been living there, like, let's give them some, small $20,000, $30,000 grants to kind of, put on a new roof or new siding or whatever that might be. So I'm sure they have info on it on their website if anyone wants to check that out. But,
and similarly, there's to your point there. I've seen communities where they do this kind of, it's almost like a synthetic TIF, where they're like, go ahead and we'll help you add value to your community, to your house. We just won't raise your value in the tax portfolio. So your tax bill will stay the same. And we'll wait and take a balloon payment should you ever sell your house, that we've got a first right or clawback on our investment. We see this in historic neighborhoods where a family needs to replace their windows, but they just happen to be aged into their house. And, to replace wood windows in a historic house are super expensive. And so a lot of families can't afford them, but the historic preservation department doesn't want to see the house go decay. So they'll say, we'll pay for the windows and we'll just wait for you to sell your house whenever that happens, and we'll recoup our money then. That's a fair way of dealing with it.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It's a win-win situation because the low wealth individual that's in the house gets actually better heating and cooling bills too. But you're also being fair that you're not driving them out of their house with their taxes. Or worse, they'll just do the cheap option and just put plastic windows in, which will devalue the asset. So there's lots of ways to do this. Oftentimes what you'll find is planners have no, I'm saying this as a planner, in a lot of cities, planners have no idea about the financing side. So this is where you can step in and help your peers get a deal done.
Hey, Joe.
Yep, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. This is Jordan. I work in K-12 finance, and we are a little bit the opposite of how an urban planner would look at this, because we intentionally distribute the cost across the entire community, because public education in the United States is considered a community good, or a community service. But one of the things that's really fascinating is it's hard for us to, you talk about like people, you got to run more pipe, and so you would charge more for people who are farther away. And in education, we kind of look at the problem the opposite way. We say that student's ability to access the services we provide is greater. So really, as school districts, we would want to go further in providing support to a family who's further away, especially in a district like mine where, we're kind of we have this really, we're a suburb of Portland, Oregon, and we have this really strange dynamic where half of our rural students are our wealthiest students, and the other half of our rural students are our poorest students. And then there's a spectrum represented in the urban core, if you will. I don't know that you call it urban. Like I said, we're a suburb. So, but the city center of our city. And so I'm just wondering if this kind of thing has ever been used to model out expenditure across a school district.
No, but I'd love to do a school model because we call them the third government. It's like, and oftentimes the school district receives more revenue than a city does. And it's just like you actually get more money than the city. And you see our models, you see how it's produced. You should be all over, like talking with cities and counties, saying we need more wealth creation. But I do have a fun school graphic. Let's see, where is it? This is a presentation I did on psychology and how humans behave. And you all probably, this will be a good joke for you. But people, this is the psychological way of looking at human behavior. This is what it translates to in normal people language. But you're all mathletes. 90% of other humans you bump into hate math. And I'll give you an example. This is an NPR article about busing. And when I heard this on the radio, I was like, oh my God, this is hilarious. So there's this guy, Jeff Bennett. So Indiana decided to remove transportation out of the school funds and treat it as its own cost. So if you put your kid on a bus, it's costing you $40 to $50 a month. And people were outraged. And the school system was like, look, we don't have more revenue. We got to pay for these things. So this guy, Jeff Bennett, every day spent a half hour in line each way, dropping his kid off and then picking his kid up. So that was to get his son to school. So I was like, okay, we could do some math on this. Here it is. Jeff spends 30 minutes each way to drop his kid off, so that his time per day is an hour, right? So let's go ahead and multiply that times 20. So in Indiana, the average value of time on somebody's salary is about $28 an hour, right? So if you're spending 20 hours a month, $28 an hour, that means that it costs Jeff $560 a month to waste dropping his kid off just to save $40. Does that make any mathematical sense to you? No. So, okay, Joe, maybe he's not an average salaried person. Maybe he's poor. All right, let's change it to $10 an hour. Jeff's making $10 an hour. He's still losing $200 a month. So another way, Jeff loses $160 a month. So as a planner, I look at this and I'm like, that's hilarious to begin with. But secondly, we're missing the obvious thing in the story, that Jeff's doing this because his kid can't walk to school. So how about a sidewalk? Could we invest in a sidewalk, and that will save transportation costs for both Jeff and the school system to pay for a sidewalk? But anyway, I love this story about math. You kind of like dragged it out of me with the reference to schools. But yes, your transportation costs in schools are immense. So how about building neighborhoods where kids could actually walk? That would be good. I walked to school when I was a kid.
And I know we have municipal governments represented on this in this group. I don't know if we have any state governments, but I think you're really hitting a critical nail on the head. So, like anecdotally, I don't live in the school district that I work in, so my kids go to school in a higher poverty school district. And we did that on purpose. We wanted our kids to go to a school with a little bit more diversity, and a lot of Oregon school districts lack that. And but this neighborhood that we live in is like this little pocket off of a state road that has quite a bit of poverty in it. Well, there's no way for any kid that goes to that school to safely walk to school, because you have to walk down a state road that goes through the city of Tigard, but as part of the Tigard-Tualatin School District Safe Route to School Plan. And so, I initially reached out to the school district, to my counterpart, the CFO here in Tigard, and I said, hey, what do we got to do to get this on the school district Safe Route to School Plan? They're like, well, it's already on the plan, but there's not really anything we can do about it. And I said, why is that? And they said, well, because the city of Tigard doesn't own that road. It's owned by the state of Oregon. So then I reached out to the state of Oregon and I said, hey, what do we do about this? This is a school district. This is a school that is serving predominantly Black and Latinx students and who experience poverty. And we know that at the school we have an obesity problem among the students. And so like the ability for kids to walk and bike to school safely would be a huge impact for this community. And we only need 2 city blocks of sidewalks filled in to make a safe route to school. And the state government of course, has different interests. And this is how government works. We all have misaligned interests on some of these types of things. And so really, I don't know where I'm going with all this other than to say all of these government agencies need to start working together and aligning our interests to get the real work that we need done in equity in schools, at least, done.
Jordan, if you could email me, I want to send you, I've got this whole book scanned. Anybody that wants this, just email me and I'll show you in with it. It's a PDF of a book called the City, Town, and Country. So we have the city, the town, and the country. This is the teacher's guide. This is a 3rd grade textbook from 1959. So in kindergarten, you learn about your house. 1st grade, the schools. 2nd grade, the neighborhood. 3rd grade, you learn about regional government. You do that, right? So in the teacher's guide, I find this hilarious. This is for the teacher, for you guys to learn about how to deal with 3rd graders. While patterns vary from state to state, counties are responsible for education, library, health, welfare, etc. In studying the functions performed by your county, you will no doubt find there's an overlapping of jurisdictions and a lack of coordination between the communities within it. That happened? Here's the lesson plan. It's painfully white. We'll put that aside. It's also misogynistic. The girls are all shoved out in the hallway over here. But you read about a new factory that gets built and even more kids that go to school. Gee, who would have thought? In blue, this is what you ask your 3rd graders. Give 4 good reasons for building a new school. Your 3rd graders talk about what? Equity, everybody should have a desk, maybe get another teacher. That's called infrastructure. Okay. On the right, you read about Mr. Canfield, who lived next door. He didn't want a new school. He says, our taxes are too high now. If we build a new school, we'll need more teachers and everything else. Look at that. Things cost money. So you ask your 3rd graders, why would some people have to pay higher taxes if a new school were built? So anyway, I'll share the whole book with you. I'm just going to tell you right now, you're going to want to drink a 6-pack of beer while you're reading it, because it's going to make you really upset that we don't teach this book anymore. But it's all these great lessons of municipal finance and third grade textbook.